Hi, welcome to the Live Your Dream podcast, episode 16, how a mom of four turned her diet soda addiction into a $100 million company. I'm your host, Selena Lee. Before I start the show today, I want to let you know that I'm working on a new episode where I'll be answering your questions. So if you have any questions or challenges in your career or about pursuing your dreams, please send me a message on my website. You can click on today's show notes on your podcast app to go to my website or go to selinalee.co. That is CELINALEE.co. I've also put together a guide to the 3 steps to finding true career fulfillment, which is the answer to a question I get the most. How do the successful people I've met figure out what they want to do with their lives? If you're interested, you can also download it on today's show notes on your podcast app or on my website, selinalee.co/episode 16. On today's episode, I am so excited to share with you the conversation I've had with Kara Goldin, the founder and CEO of Hint, well known for its flagship product, Hint Water. Kara started the company with a simple idea to make water that tastes great. After leaving her job at AOL, Kara was overweight, had low energy, and was suffering from adult acne. Even though she changed her diet and worked out a lot, she still had a hard time losing her weight. And then she realized that her addiction to diet soda was a problem. So she quit drinking soda and tried drinking plain water, but she hated how bland it tasted. So she began cutting up fruit and throwing it in pitchers of water, and this little experiment not only helped her to continue drinking water, but led to her starting her business. While she was trying to build her company, she was introduced to someone who was pretty senior at Coca Cola who told her her idea was terrible and then said, "Sweetie, Americans love sweets." Well, he was obviously wrong, and 14 years later since starting her business, Kara grew it into a $100 million company. And what's remarkable is that she also raised 4 children during this time. What I thought was really interesting about Kara's journey is that she didn't let her circumstances or the situation she was in limit her possibilities or her future. When she was a student at Arizona State University, the kind of companies she may be interested in working for didn't come to recruit the students on campus. Most people in these situations probably would either complain or be upset, but that's not what Kara did. You'll hear about how she worked as a waitress at a Mexican restaurant and then used that as an opportunity to meet many different people, which led to her getting 60 job offers. When I interview guests on my show, I usually ask about their family and about their parents because I believe parents, of course, play a very important role in shaping the future of their children. I think there's no better role model for children than seeing their mother or father pursue their own dreams. Kara talks about how her mother, who was an art teacher, decided to change her career into fashion when she was 45 years old and worked until she was 80 years old in the fashion industry. Seeing how her mother had the courage to pursue her own dreams obviously had a huge impact on Kara becoming an entrepreneur. And now, as a mother of 4 children herself, Kara teaches her own children how to pursue their dreams by showing them through her own actions. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Kara, I'm so excited to start our conversation.
Yay,
how are you today?
Good, how are you?
I'm great. I'm so happy that you're here. Let's start with your childhood. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
So I grew up in the U.S., in Arizona, and yeah, I lived there most of my life. I actually moved from Minneapolis, Minnesota when I was a really little girl, and my dad, I think, decided that he didn't want to shovel snow anymore, and so moved our family to Arizona. I mean,
Wow.
There were less than 100,000 people in like Phoenix, Scottsdale area at the time, and so I always joke that I'm like an original settler of Arizona because there was nobody there, and I grew up there, and and then ended up really wanting to pursue media, and so moved to New York right after college. I went to Arizona State University, and and moved out here to New York, where we are today. And
I heard you were a competitive gymnast growing up.
yeah, so I was a competitive gymnast. I always liked gymnastics. I was found that I was never going to be, truly like competitive because I was better at the bars and also the vault were like my two areas. I mean, a lot of strength, upper body strength, which you can't really tell today, but
I've heard that you thought that you're not naturally good at it, but still you pursued it. I think that shows a lot about what kind of person you are.
Yeah, no, it was hard. I mean, it was challenging every single day. Like I would come in and I would, it's interesting because I would like look at like my team members and I would see that some of these girls were like really great at like all around. And I just, for me, like I wasn't coordinated enough to do like floor. I just, for some reason, but I just became really, really good at the bars and at the vault. So I really just decided to just go focus on that. And, with that, I also learned that, if you do focus on things that, are challenging to you, but you keep feeling like you're making progress, then you can actually be successful. And I had a great deal of respect for having teammates that could actually do certain things that I couldn't either. And so I want those people on my team. But it was actually, I was the person that they would throw in when we were doing like the vault or the bars when they needed somebody to come in and really like kill it. So
that's so great. So did you have a childhood dream when you were growing up?
I think I was always an entrepreneur. I was always like trying to do things. And I mean, I remember, I was just telling somebody the story the other day. I remember when I was growing up and watching, we have 5 kids in my family, but it's almost like 2 different sets of families. I have a sister that's 15 years older than me and a brother that's 14 years older than me.
Oh, wow.
And then my parents took a break and then they had my brother that's 3 years older than me and my sister that's 2 years older than me.
So you're the youngest of
I was the
5.
youngest.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I was watching like my older siblings, like having jobs and going to college and doing things, while I was a little girl. And I remember thinking like, wow, I would love to have a job. And so I did a little bit of babysitting, but then I thought, how do I actually bring like, get more people to and make more money by, babysitting essentially. Mm-hmm. And so I remember setting up like a miniature camp during the summer in my garage and using like a paper towel box to like set up like an obstacle course and where kids like really loved it. And then I was like, okay, today kids, we're gonna like decorate the box. And I would bring a bunch of magazines out and I said, okay, everybody has to cut out like, beach balls. And then like they would be looking through the magazines who could find the beach balls the fastest, and then we decorate like the paper towels. And it was like these parents would come by, and I mean I was maybe, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, and parents would come by and they'd be like, gosh, my kids have so much fun with you, and it's because I was a kid, right? And I would like think like that about stuff. But I mean that, like, I never called that like being an entrepreneur. I just called that fun. Yeah, right. And so I've always had this mindset that like work can actually be fun. Yeah. And you can have a passion for what you're doing if you, just think about what you want to do every day. And, there were definitely, times when maybe like some of the projects weren't as successful as the other projects in my little like miniature camp, but I was like, oh, okay, that one didn't work out so well, but like, let's do something else. And so, so, I mean, it was crazy. I mean, just thinking back on it, but I think like as a kid, I wouldn't have said like, I'm going to go be an entrepreneur. I really wanted to be an attorney. Yeah. And,
really?
And I think my brother is an attorney today. Mm-hmm. And my brother is 14 years older than me. So I think like he probably had an influence on me to, like go and be an attorney. But then when I started like actually taking some classes in law when I was in college, I was like, I don't want to be it. And then I ended up marrying an attorney, which is like, and now he talks about himself as a recovering attorney. He didn't want to be an attorney.
Me too.
I just laugh about it that it's like, it's life, right? Like,
so you went to college, and then tell me about that. So did you have an idea about what you wanted to do when you were graduating from college?
Well, so I probably started out thinking like, okay, I'll go like pre-law, or, large state universities have these crazy, like pre-law, like,
right.
There's a lot of people that go to law school, obviously, who didn't take those classes, but we had the opportunity to sort of take some of these classes along the way. And I felt like I liked those classes, but what I really, really liked was the writing courses. And so very quickly, I ended up switching into journalism and communications. And I remember taking a political communications class in particular that really like got me so excited, where they were, my teacher was talking about like political campaigns and how things like, in like the late 60s when Nixon was running, like people actually saw like that he sweat a lot, like on, the television, versus like Kennedy actually seemed like he really had his act together, and how like that impact of how he actually communicated, like really, like cost him the election ultimately.
Yeah.
And I thought like that is so interesting. Like in any single career, it can just be like so important, or it is so important for how you actually communicate. And so I realized really early on that communication can be about writing, but it can actually be about speaking and about how you like, ultimately get your story across, right? And I just became like really fascinated about that whole fact. And, that was what was so great about going to Arizona State, was that, the school was pretty small within like a much larger school, but it was like, I was learning. And I thought like that was so cool. So I really after that thought like I want to do something in media and communications. I didn't exactly know what that meant, but.
And then I heard you were working as a waitress at a restaurant, and then you met some people there.
Yeah, well, so basically I was taking a bunch of classes too. I ended up taking an extra semester to graduate because I had a major in journalism and communications and a minor in finance, because I really felt like early on I didn't really know much about finance. I mean, I tell young entrepreneurs and college students now that I think it's really, really important to figure out if you're an engineer, for example, and you really just don't understand how to read a balance sheet, or like you should go and take classes while you're, at Stanford on, finance. Like, I think like that is the biggest thing that I did. Nobody told me to do that kind of stuff, but I felt like, those were my hardest classes because I was not a natural in actually learning those things. But I, ended up getting a minor in that, and, I'm really, really happy I did. And then
it sounds like you're always trying to challenge yourself to do the things that you're not naturally good at.
Totally.
People are not like that.
No, they're not.
They would avoid
like
it.
That. Yeah, they would avoid it. And, and that's what, I think just in life, I have an overall philosophy too, that it's like you should, always be challenging yourself to, look at, I'm thinking in particular, my daughter is applying to schools right now, and she's like living in a very liberal community in Northern California where, people kind of think the same. Like generally, most of the population thinks very much the same. And so she wants to go to a very liberal school. And I'm like, okay. But on the other side of things, like if you want to really, she wants to be a writer as well. And I said, if you really want to be a strong writer, I mean, you know how to think about being liberal really, really well. Why don't you go to some place that actually makes you feel uncomfortable? Because whenever you're outside of your comfort zone, you're going to learn, right? And you may see that there's a little bit of, truth and how these people think about. And so I'm always in everything I do, ever since I was a little kid, I didn't sort of not want to be in a class or not want to be in a group or not want to be in a job because I'm they're not like me. Instead, I was always put me in, put me in, coach, right? Like there, I can do this too. And I, felt like, that's where I was going to learn the most about people. So,
wow.
Yeah. So anyway, so the waitressing, so I was, putting myself, especially, I worked, a little bit just for extra money, waitressing at this Mexican restaurant in Phoenix. And I'd actually done a little bit in high school there as well when I needed some extra money, and they let me like do hostessing and a little bit of waitressing shifts on weekends. And then when I was in college, it was a little bit of schlep to get over there, but they were like, listen, if you have some extra hours, and I was like just trying to get through some of my finance classes and graduate, they said, sure, you can definitely come, and we'll let you work some extra hours. And so I found that there were like these regulars that would always come in there, a lot of these businessmen, and I was just like, they would ask me like, oh, you're going to college? And I said, yeah, I'm going to college. Mom's graduated. And, the age-old question, like, what are you going to do when you graduate?
Right.
And I said, I don't know, like, what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to, like, leave Arizona, and I'm probably going to go somewhere. And they were like, where are you going to go? I'm like, I don't know. Like, where should I go? Should I go to LA? Should I go to San Francisco? Like, where should I go? And, I traveled, like, to Los Angeles, but outside of that, I really hadn't been too much outside of Arizona. And so, so the more like I started talking to people, I'd get really excited, like this visual of these cities. And I thought like, wow, like that seems so cool. And, I'd seen movies of like New York City, and I thought, oh, wow, that'd be really fun. Maybe I should go visit and see what it's like. So this one guy, that, I'd met, I had no idea really what he did, but he was like, oh, well, if you go to Los Angeles, you should just, you should let me know, because I'll set you up with my company for some interviews. And I'm like, what's your company? And this is at a point where I'm like researching different companies.
Right.
And he's like, oh, I work for Anheuser-Busch. I'm like, really? Like, what do you do for Anheuser-Busch? And I'm thinking like, at that time, I probably thought like everybody who works for Anheuser-Busch, like, sells beer.
Right.
Like I just, that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
And so he's like, oh, I actually put our beer on movie sets.
So
I'm like,
cool.
what? Like how did
what
you,
is that?
like what do you mean you put it on movie sets? Like you drive a truck and you like deliver it to movie sets? And he said, no. I make sure that the placement on movie sets is like respecting our brand. And so like, you wouldn't see Budweiser labels in like a scene where there's a crime being done.
Got it.
And so I was like, really? Like you get paid to do that? Like that is so crazy. And he's like, yeah, and I said, wow, like really? Like, are you guys hiring? That seems really cool. I could be on movie sets, and I would have a gut for that kind of stuff too. And he said, yeah, no, I'm happy to hook you up with the people there. And so I made an appointment to go to Los Angeles, and then I was like, he's like, well, I know people in like Chicago too, if you want to interview. Like a friend of mine works for McKinsey, and he's going to be in Arizona next week, and you should meet him, and we'll come into your restaurant. And so I meet him, and I'm like, what's a consultant? Like that's, interesting. And like, I had no idea. And so he was like, yeah, if you come to Chicago, we have this like training program. And I'm like, what's a training program? And I was just this, like, I was all ears and very excited about all these opportunities. It was interesting because ASU, like, never really, like, they had people come on campus from different companies, but I felt like it was all of the accounting companies and the like, I don't know, it just wasn't like the place where they were just, doing like coming on and recruiting for the type of jobs that I really wanted to work at. So I just like, I wasn't angry about it. I just was like, I don't know, like I just have to figure it out. And, my fallback frankly was I could also like stay waitressing at the Mexican restaurant Teepee, and it wouldn't be the end of the world. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but I just thought, like, I don't know, I'll just keep exploring and figuring it out. So anyway, I went, and you may have read this story or heard the story before. I ended up going to a travel agency back when there was travel agencies, and I went to a travel agency and said, listen, I need to go from Phoenix to Los Angeles and then to San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, and New York, because I started feeling like there were like all these opportunities if I actually just put something on the calendar to say like I'm coming. And so for the next, so basically I went and I said, how much would a ticket cost for me to actually go to all of these cities? And, for 1 month, I want to just go and travel. And like I'd asked friends, I'm like, can I stay at your parents' house? And like, I made sure like I had enough money that I could buy like flowers and a gift for people, like when I was staying along the way. And then basically I said, can you just call me back and tell me how much a ticket is once you figure this whole thing out? And I wish I remembered exactly how much the ticket was, but it was like $470 for the entire thing. And I was like, what? Like, wow. That is like, are you sure? And then finally I was like, okay, here's my credit card. Mm-hmm. And so I gave her my Visa and she booked it. And then I got the tickets and I was like, oh my God, I'm like really going. I mean, this is crazy. Like $470. I mean, even though it was, almost 30 years ago now, it was like still like it was cheap, to go to all these places. So, so as I started setting up all these meetings, I found like, I get somebody on the phone and they're like, well, can you be here on certain dates? And I said, well, I already have my ticket. And then they'd hear my story. And they're like, that's so cool, And I was like, yeah, if you know any people like in Boston, I'm going to be there for 3 days and I've only got one interview set up. And they're like, oh gosh, it's like, you're just looking for entry-level positions. I have a friend who works there and let me connect you. So anyway, I had like over 90 job interviews.
Wow.
In a month. It was crazy. And what was nuts is like it was something, again, I wish I like would have actually written down how many, but it was crazy. It was like 60 job offers. I mean, it was
gosh. So
insane.
how did you pick?
It was interesting because I ultimately ended up, I think I interviewed at, I always wanted to work at Fortune because I really felt like that was like the creme de la creme of like finance magazines. And I wanted to write for Fortune. And so I wrote a letter to the editor of Fortune magazine, a guy named Marshall Loeb. And I said, I'm like coming to New York and I really, really want to, this is like before emails or anything. I really want to work.
Wrote him a real letter.
I wrote him a real letter. And so he's like, sends me back, like really probably his assistant writes me a letter back. Thank you so much for your interest. If you're ever in the New York area, let us know. So I'm like, okay, so I'm in New York and I didn't actually have that interview set up yet. And so I just walked into the HR department and this is before like security, wow. Right, in the building. And so I walk in and I said, hi, I have this letter from Marshall Loeb. And he said, if I'm ever in the New York area and I'm here. And so I'd love to like meet with him. and he said, and the woman who was at the desk, she was like, oh, well, do you have an appointment? And I said, no. But he said, like, if I'm ever in the New York area to like come by and see him. And so I'm here. And she was like, oh, I don't know what to, let me ask my supervisor and see what she says. So, this poor woman, she asked her supervisor, the supervisor comes out and she was like, oh, I think what they meant was that you were supposed to set an appointment and like let us know. And I was like, oh, really? Well, I'm leaving tomorrow. So if there's any way that you could like get me in there. And she was like, listen, honestly, like you're brand new out of school. You're not going to get a job at Fortune magazine, like right out of college. And I said, but is there jobs anywhere in the building? Because I'm here right now. And they said, well, there's this job in like circulation and it's an executive assistant in circulation. And I had no idea what circulation was. I was just like, oh, like, what do they do? And I mean, she's like explaining it to me, and it's like went in one ear and out the other. I had no idea. And I was like, sure, I'd love to meet the woman. And so I met this woman, Brooke McMurray, who was my boss and ultimately my boss.
So you ended up getting the job.
So I ended up getting the job. And she was just like, look, what we do is we figure out like the little cards that go in magazines. We actually try and get people to subscribe to magazines. And it was cross-title with like Fortune and Sports Illustrated and Time and People. And I was like, wow, those are like all the great magazines. Like, that'd be super fun. So I go home to Phoenix and find out, like, they call on the phone. They don't like send emails. They're like, we want to make you this job offer, and we're not going to pay for you to move to New York, but like, we'd love to have you come. And I was like, wow, that's really great. And I remember sitting down with my dad and saying, like, yeah, I've got all these job offers. He's like, this is so crazy. Like, you just like picked up the phone and like went into these companies. And I was like, yeah, it's like, he really wasn't involved in like the whole process, but he was super proud of me that I just like went and figured it out what I really wanted to ultimately do. And I remember like finally deciding, okay, I'm going to go and work for Time for this woman, Brooke McMurray. And then I got really nervous. Like 2 days before I was moving, I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm moving to New York. I don't have an apartment. I like have a little bit of savings. My sister's best friend lived in New York down in like the East Village in like between B and C, which was like not a good area at the time at all. And so I'm sleeping on her couch for a few weeks until I got my first paycheck. And, I was just like really nervous about the whole thing. And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to be able to get through it. And he was like, my dad said, why are you so nervous? And I said, because I'm moving from Arizona to New York and it's a really scary thing. And he said, but you don't have anything. And I'm like, what? And he was like, I mean, even when you get an apartment, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, you get an apartment and it doesn't work out, and then you come back home. It's not like, it's not like you have a lot of furniture. It's not like you have maybe a year lease. There's not that much risk.
Right.
And in you going,
not much to lose.
Yeah, there's not that much to lose. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, how much is an airline ticket to go from, New York back to Phoenix one way? And so we like looked it up, and I realized it was like $600 just for like that one way. And he was like, so if it's really bad, you just come back. And that's what you do. And so I was like, okay, yeah, there's not like, it's not so scary. And so I went and came out. And it's funny because I think about that a lot, because when I think about like risk overall, whenever I fear something, I think like, what is really the risk? And I think that that's something that really, like, that was the first time I really, really heard somebody sort of spell it out like that. But anyway, so I take the job at Time, and I move out here, and I was, an executive assistant in circulation initially, and then very quickly started getting lots of additional experience from managing different initiatives, and ultimately ended up managing their airline circulation, which was lots of fun. Yeah.
And then you eventually worked as an executive at AOL, and then you left to start Hint Water.
Yeah. So I actually, right after Time, I went to CNN for a couple of years, and then actually met my husband right when I was leaving Time, and then we moved out to San Francisco, and I worked for a little startup that was actually Steve Jobs' idea, that was doing CD-ROM shopping. This is back in the mid '90s, and AOL had acquired us. They had invested in us and then acquired us, and then I was asked to run this button called Shopping. And so I did that actually for almost 7 years, and then had started my family in '99, and had another child in 2001, and was pregnant with my third, and then decided I think I'm gonna like leave and try and get something closer to San Francisco. And that's when I really started looking at like my own health. Like I'd lost the baby weight. I was trying to get in shape, and I still had over 50 pounds that I was trying to lose. And so I ended up going to a bunch of different doctors after telling them like I run like 45 minutes a day. I'm like, watching what I'm eating. I'm shopping at Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. Like I'm doing all the right things, but I still couldn't lose weight. And it wasn't just weight. It was also like the way I felt and like my skin. And there were like lots of things like that. I just really felt like I was kind of, not as healthy as I ultimately wanted to be. And so finally, I, looked at everything that I was eating and drinking, and diet soda was something that I never imagined was actually the thing that was like really, causing me to not be as healthy as I wanted to be. But I eliminated it primarily because the ingredients, like I didn't understand the ingredients in, the product. And so when I did that, just eliminated diet soda, Diet Coke in particular, for plain water. I was never a water drinker. I should have been, but although I found it boring, I sort of forced myself to drink plain water. I lost 24 pounds in 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
And I thought like, what? This is like insane. And then I really started like realizing that there's this whole like messaging problem that goes on around health, which is that, most people think that, if a product says diet on it or low fat or, even other words like vitamin and zero, that those are actually better for us, when actually there's no scientific research to say that those things are like healthier and better for you. So that for me was like an epiphany. And again, I was a tech executive, a media executive. I wasn't like I'm a pretty good baker. I wasn't like I'm not like a culinary like wizard. And
it's like a completely different industry.
Totally different. Yeah. And my dad had actually, growing up in his house, he was the founder of Healthy Choice. And so, but even though he was like an entrepreneur, he actually did it inside of a large company, ConAgra, initially an armor food company, and they were acquired by ConAgra. So he was always like kind of thinking of ideas, but being a incubator inside of a large company is very different than what we're doing at Hint, where we're actually starting it from scratch and raising money and, actually becoming a company. So that for me was like, I didn't think about it as like, I always, still didn't think, okay, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur or I want to get out of big companies. If anything, I was really thinking about like, wow, like tech is really interesting and I feel like I'm learning a lot. But I also felt like I was often the person in the room who people wanted me to teach them.
Yeah.
Right? Like I had grown, I was the youngest female vice president at AOL. And that for me was like, I still wanted to learn. So I actually thought like, do I go to business school? Do I what do I do next? And then when I really figured out like how to get myself healthier, I had lost over 50 pounds then in like 6 months. And I thought like, there's this whole world out there, again, that is like being marketed to and they don't know they're being marketed to. And if I could actually develop a water product that is like $2 or less, then people's health will change. And we don't have to tell them, beat them over the head, say like, drink this and then you're going to get better. Instead, we can just say, try this, and see what happens. Yeah. And I was like, again, so cool. Like I was like excited by this, more excited than I was in like any other role that I had been in, because people were actually saying to me, wow, it's really helping me. And so I just to back up a little bit, I started slicing up fruit and throwing it in water, thinking, this with just a little bit of fruit, it actually makes the water taste better. And then I went to my local Whole Foods and said, how do I actually develop a product that is, or could I actually, like, do you think there'd be interest in this kind of product? And, you know, it was pointed to things like vitamin water, which was, really like the hot product at that time when I was thinking about starting this. And like most people, and especially the people who were even stocking the shelves of Whole Foods, didn't realize how much sugar was in, a product that's calling itself water. It's vitamin water. And I was like, isn't that so crazy? And he's like, wow, you've really taught me something like about, the beverage industry in these categories. And I was like, I know. I was like, it's a huge epiphany for me. And then all these diet sweeteners too. Like I felt like, again, I wasn't drinking full sugar Coke. I was actually drinking diet, right? And so
thinking that is better for you.
And thinking it's better for me. So I really didn't want to go back to drinking stuff that was diet. Like I had convinced myself that was actually the culprit of sort of what was going on. And so, so really at that point, I, made the decision that this is, if I don't do this product, like I was living in San Francisco, I looked all over San Francisco, I looked in New York, I was traveling, that summer down to Southern California. Like I really looked around at all these stores, and I looked in, Korean delis. I looked in, I thought like maybe there might be like some, little drink out there that is like, and I really couldn't find it. So I had no idea. What I realized today is I had stumbled upon a hole in the market, but I was way ahead of my time because my realization of what ultimately diet sweeteners were doing to me and to other people I was so far ahead. Yeah. I mean, just now, the company started almost 14 years ago, 4 to 5 years, the last 4 to 5 years, people have really started to realize that we need to clean up our food and beverage environment. And it was interesting, another sort of piece of, kind of a parallel path piece. A friend of mine who was one of my roommates in college worked and still works for the Center for Disease Control. And so I was just talking to her on the phone, and she had been on the poison control for years group, and then she had gotten moved to this new module called type 2 diabetes, and I was like, oh, what is type 2 diabetes? And she said, oh, it's really interesting, it's clearly different than type 1 diabetes, but they're not really sure what causes it. And at that point, 14 years ago, it was 2% of the population had type 2 diabetes. Wow. Today it's between 40 and 45% of the population has type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. In places like Beijing, 50% of the population under the age of 18 has type 2 diabetes. In other areas where, PS, we've seen huge soda consumption growth because finally the markets have opened up for Coke and Pepsi to frankly go into these markets, like Saudi Arabia, where, people don't drink a lot of alcohol, the sort of go-to luxury drink is Coca Cola. Right, and so they're actually seeing over 50% of the population has type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes in Saudi Arabia. Wow. Which is crazy. That's right? Crazy. So I felt like I would hear the stuff about sweeteners, and again, not just sugar, but also diet sweeteners. And I thought, well, there's a lot of diseases that maybe or maybe not are being caused by these sweeteners. But if I can actually develop a drink for $2 or less that's just going to help people drink water, they're going to get better.
Yeah, I think it's one thing to think that, this product needs to exist because it's better for people's health, and then to actually go and do it, right? Yeah. I think this was your first time starting a business. So how did you know what to do?
I know. And
what do you do?
I mean, I think for me, and frankly, it hasn't changed too much, even 14 years later and, over $100 million company. It's I still look at, first of all, like, I'm still rolling up my sleeves every single day and just really trying to like solve problems, right? And so the great thing as CEO is I can actually like dig into lots of different things. I mean, I ran the e-commerce team at AOL, and I actually, like, when I decided I mean, over 40% of our business now is direct to consumer, which is really unusual for a beverage company. We still have great relationships with retailers like Target and Costco and some of the others, but we really wanted to start our direct to consumer business so that we'd have a relationship with the customer and data and all those kinds of things. Like, if I wouldn't have worked at AOL, I wouldn't have sort of known what to do. So I, decided, like, let me just go and figure out how to set up a really, really basic site. And, I know a little bit of code. And
I heard the day that you told your husband that you are going to start this company, you also gave him another news.
Yeah. So I was actually kind of mad at him because he was like, when I was telling him that this was the company that I wanted to start, he was sort of humoring me and said, so what's the name of the company? And I said, oh, okay, so it's going to be called Wawa. And he's like, oh my God. And he is like, first of all, like, I had taken a couple of years off to hang out with my, young kids. And he said, so he's a New Yorker. And he said, so, there's this little chain in Pennsylvania, not so little really, but there's a chain and it's called Wawa. It's a convenience store chain. And so if you actually please don't do that name because I'll have to he's a lawyer, right? So he's like, I'll have to deal with unwinding this whole thing and it'll be a mess. So I wasn't very happy with him at that moment. And then he was, again, kind of humoring me over, he was like, just keep talking to me about this idea, about the name. And I said, we're giving people hints and it's just a hint of a flavor and and then I said, hint, that's what we should do. We should call it hint. And he said, 4-letter word, not going to happen. You're never going to get it registered. And I was like, and by the way, drink water, not sugar. And he was like, huh. Like, no way, it's descriptive, it's not going to happen. And I'm like, oh my God, but I'm really angry and I got to go. I'm going to this co-packing plant tomorrow to actually bottle this product. He's like, you've already figured that out? And I said, yeah, I talked to this woman on the phone in Chicago and I'm flying out there and I've got, childcare coverage and it'd be really great if you came. And he was like, well, I'm busy, I'm working on something. And I was like, well, it'd be really great if you came because I'm getting I feel really nauseous. And he was like, what do you mean you feel nauseous? And I was like, okay, fine, I'm pregnant. I just didn't know how to tell you this. And it's all he was like, what? And he was like, you're going to start a beverage company and you have no idea what you're doing. And you're pregnant. How far along are you?
Fourth child.
Yeah, and I was like, well, I'm I think I'm about almost 11 weeks. So he's like, you're 11 weeks pregnant? And I was like, yeah, I know, crazy. And he was like, oh my God. He was like, this is crazy. He walks out of the room and I was like, is he coming back? What's going to happen? And so he does. So he ends up coming back and he was like, okay, fine, I'll come with you. To Chicago. And then we went to Chicago and he saw the bottles rolling off the line of the initial run. We were out there for a couple of days and he really started to see what I saw, which was, he's the son of a doctor. And he said we felt when we left New York and moved to San Francisco, we didn't really know people. And not that we were, extremely sick, but we had, I had had babies and we had to go to new doctors and whatever. He felt in New York, he had this network of doctors that if he needed to call somebody, he could figure it out, right? When we went to San Francisco, it was kind of hard. It wasn't as hard for us as maybe it was for other people, but to find really, really good people, right? And so he felt whenever you're trying to find a great doctor or you go to a doctor and then, you think okay, that is a doctor gives you bad news. How many times do people get bad news and then they just think well, maybe it'll just go away, right? You hear these stories of people who have high cholesterol and then they're just oh, it'll get better. Like, I feel fine. So it's like fine or whatever. And so he was like, God, if you could just get people to enjoy clean water and good water, but also clean water, like, you could actually save like people lots of money, and you could change health overall. And at that time, I mean, the world was talking about, the US was talking about a national healthcare system. He was like, we wouldn't even be talking about a national healthcare system if people actually like paid attention to what they were going into their body. So he still wasn't like on board with, you know, I didn't even ask him to jump in, but I was like, yeah, that's really important. He was helping me think about things. And so then over the next month, I mean, he was like, you know, getting more and more interested in what I was doing. He was also getting interested because I was writing large $50,000, $75,000 checks off our personal bank account. I made some money at AOL. And so he was like, oh my God, like, you can really spend money. Like, I can't believe you're buying $30,000 worth of caps for these bottles. Like, this is like crazy. And so we actually developed the product in 6 months prior to my son Justin being born. Yeah. And then like that morning, that I was like, we ended up getting the shipment like a couple weeks later than we thought, the initial shipment, a couple weeks later than we thought. And so that came like the day before I was having a planned C-section. And so I wake up the morning I'm having a planned C-section, and I said to my husband, he's like, what do you want to do this morning? We don't have to be at the hospital till 2:00. And I said, I really want to deliver the cases to Whole Foods and see if they'll put it on the shelf. Like, I would like go in to labor, like really excited that I was like, you know, had gotten the product on the shelf. He's like, you're crazy. Like, this is like on a lot of levels, you're crazy. And so I was like, I know. And we went over to Whole Foods, and you know, the guy sees me and he's like, oh my God, you're so pregnant. And I was like, I know, it's crazy, right? It'd be so great if you put it on the shelf. Like, I probably like got a little bit of pity from him that I was like this pregnant. It was so funny. And so we left the cases there and then went to the hospital and you know, delivered Justin. He's healthy, everything's great. And then the next day I'm in the hospital just relaxing, and we get a phone call from this guy at Whole Foods, and I'm half asleep, and my husband answers the phone, and I hear him talking. I'm like, who is it? I'm thinking like a friend or family calling to see how I'm doing. Right. And no, so he's like, it's a guy from Whole Foods. And I was like, what's he saying? And he's like, he said the product's gone. And I was like, give me the phone. And I'm like, who took the product? Like, I still didn't believe that anybody like had bought it. It was so crazy. And so so it was nuts. And so we actually got out of the hospital that day, and I went home, and you know, the guy said, we've got to have more cases of hint because like people really want it. And if people don't, I can't save your shelf space for you. And I've got a hole in, you know, the shelf because your product is gone. And, you know, I just like, we've got to get it today. So my husband said, I, you know, love it or my husband said, I'll just go deliver the cases right now. And I said, okay, that's great. And he said, I should probably like have a business card or something. I mean, this is a guy who's like a Silicon Valley tech attorney. And he was like, I was like, okay. He's like, what should be on the business card? And I said, I don't know, just write hint on there. And he's like, well, I should have it like a title or something. Like, what should I be? And I'm like, I don't know. Chief Operating Officer? I mean, and he was like, yeah, like Chief Operating Officer,
yeah, like
hint.
That.
Like, that would be great. Yeah. And so he went to FedEx Kinko's and got business cards made up that said Chief Operating Officer. And I'm like, awesome. Like, I'm going to rest right now, like while you're going and delivering the cases. And then, you know, the rest was kind of history. I mean, we went through like, you know, a lot of pieces where we had to like actually figure out how to produce a shelf-stable product without preservatives in it. You know, we never really realized as consumers, like all the games that are played by these large food and beverage companies at store level, that we were beginning to realize. And like, you know, things like category captains at stores that are like the category captains inside, like, you know, some of these large stores like Target, for example, are run by Coke or Pepsi. And so they like, you can have buyers in these stores that make decisions, but they're heavily influenced by Coke or Pepsi because they own so much of the real estate that they actually get a say whether or not your product can go in there. And I'm like, what? Like, why should that be allowed, kind of thing? And so anyway, it was like we were realizing quite a bit about, you know, what we really didn't know that could actually inhibit us from being able to grow, which was annoying, frustrating, and also super challenging and kind of a game. Like, you know, you're not going to be able to, you know, sit me in the corner. Like, I'm going to go and figure this stuff out. And so my husband was at a point where he had left his job at Netscape. He had actually started another startup and had sold it off to the Bosch Foundation, and he was trying to figure out what he wanted to do next. And I think he like really was like, wow, this is like, initially he was like, oh God, she's writing checks off her personal bank account. But then after he saw it, he was like, wow, this is like really disruptive. We could actually change health. It's kind of fun. I like tasting the product. And so that's really, you know,
so
how
he came around.
Going. Yeah. So it was lots of fun.
I'm sure it wasn't a smooth sailing for you all the time. What were some of your failures and struggles that you had to overcome to get to where you're now?
You know, I don't know. It's funny, like what some people, you know, look at as failure, I just look at as challenges, right, along the way. And I'm a big believer that, you know, when bad things happen to you along the way, and they will, that you just have to look at them as like learning experiences that didn't necessarily like go the way that you wanted them to go,
right.
But they're going to prepare you to do things differently and do things better the next time. And so, I mean, I remember this one story when we got into Starbucks, and, you know, it's a long, crazy story, but basically we end up getting into 11,000 Starbucks stores in the U.S. And so we get our product into Starbucks, and then, you know, we're in there for a year and a half. We're doing super well in the stores. And then Starbucks reaches out to us. They get a new buyer, and they're like, oh, Howard Schultz, like, woke up one day and realized that he really wants to put products in the cold case that have higher margins, like sandwiches that he can sell for more money. So this is a business decision. It's not based on like how you guys are performing. And I was like, wow, that's such a bummer. It's like millions of dollars that I counted on in my business plan. I told my board it was like a total bummer. And so I had all this product in my warehouse that I had planned, you know, for Starbucks. And so I get this call from Amazon one day, and Amazon, the buyer said, hey, listen, we're starting this new category called grocery. And this was 5 years ago. And we'd really like for you to be a part of that. And I was like, well, I've got all this product in the warehouse from Starbucks. And actually he was like, oh yeah, like I've seen you in Starbucks. And I was thinking, like, does he know that we're not in Starbucks anymore? And
so that's
then
why he
said
called.
to me, so that's what he called. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I tell people, like, that is such a great example of, you know, these you know, when these opportunities, again, like it was, I was on a major high when we got into Starbucks, and then when we're out of Starbucks, like that's a major low, right? But then all of a sudden, like, I'm like, what's going to happen next? Like, and, you know, you just have to keep your eyes and ears open about it and keep your chin up and just keep moving more than anything else. And so I think like that's a great example of that.
Yeah, that's really, really amazing.
Yeah.
Always remember that when things are going bad, you know, you have to be open to other great things coming along your way, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
In addition to Hint Water, which also has Hint Sparkling and Hint Kick and Hint Kids, you also launched sunscreen. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I had, you know, been wearing sunscreen for years, and probably not as like religiously as I should have. And finally, I had some dry patches on my nose, which ended up to be precancer spots, and I had them removed. and then started like thinking to myself and talking to my dermatologist and saying I should really wear sunscreen. And then I went to my local CVS where, most sunscreens are bought by most consumers. And I was looking around in the sea of like sunscreens trying to figure out what to buy. I didn't like mineral-based sunscreens because I felt like the titanium dioxide, like I always itched. I didn't necessarily like how it looked on my skin, and it just didn't feel right. And so I finally decided that I'd been looking up some research on sunscreens and found oxybenzone was an ingredient that was in a bunch of sunscreens. I had heard about parabens as not being so great, but I didn't hear that much about oxybenzone. And I started asking the question, why is oxybenzone? It's a UV blocker. Why is it even in sunscreens? And so I decided I'm going to find a sunscreen without oxybenzone in it. It was really, really difficult to find it. And so one day I finally found a sunscreen that didn't have oxybenzone in it, and it was $50 a bottle.
Wow.
And I thought wow, that's a lot of money. And, the average consumer who wants to just wear a sunscreen should be able to wear it without spending $50 on this product. And so, I just decided one day to just order a bunch of ingredients and see if I could actually create the sunscreen at home. And I had some of our fruit extract from our water laying around, and I took a little bit and added it to the sunscreen and thought, oh wow, the grapefruit smells pretty good. And then I had pineapple, and then I had pear. And so I put all those, together, not together in the same bottle, but, in separate things, and started wearing the sunscreen. And I'm like, my homemade sunscreen is even better. And then a friend of mine who used to work for L'Oreal said, do you know that you actually have to get FDA approval on the sunscreen? And I'm like, no, but now I do. And so I filed for FDA approval, and then a year later got the FDA approval, and then we sold it online, and then got it into Target, and it did really well. And so so that was and that was really, frankly, we started getting lots of people who were trying the sunscreen. We were in hotels as well. People were trying it in sort of different outlets than we had the water at. And people would write to us and say, wow, this is the best sunscreen. And aren't you guys the water company too? And and I was like, wow, we can be a trusted brand that people are, looking at to actually find better products. So part of what we're doing this year too is, a big initiative for us is figure out how to, look at different categories that are probably could be better and develop products, because I think that's what people are looking for, trusted brands. And unfortunately, a lot of these trusted brands that are out there are not really, people don't have a lot of trust in them because they're, developing talcum powder, and they're developing, other things that have ingredients in them that are not so great for people, and they see their family or others getting sick. And so I feel like it's something that, it was really kind of an accidental, decision and the beginning of a platform overall for the brand. So
I love how all the products you've developed, whether that's hint water or the sunscreen, came from your personal need. It really reflects you created products that you wish you had that were not available.
No, it's absolutely right. So.
And then because of that, it really shows in the authenticity and the brand and how it reflects on your products that you've developed. So you've had a very successful career. What have you learned about success that you can share with us?
I think at every single level, you have to be scrappy and have to have the ability to always be curious and roll up your sleeves and not be afraid to sort of do the exact same job that you were doing when, you were starting the company. But I think, the trick is also being able to have the vision to realize that adding people to your company can actually help you to scale, and good people to the company. But I think it's there's a lot of I've thought about this a lot, that a lot of entrepreneurs will come to me and say, like, at what point do I, stop pulling stock out of the back room at Whole Foods? Like, and I'm like, probably never. Right? Like, I think great founders always have the scrappiness and the ability to stay scrappy. Right? And the and having the love of, like, way back in the day, that's why you see serial entrepreneurs that just go and do it over and over again. So I think, like, that's the key thing. Like, if that really gets you excited, then I think that that's, like, really what, true entrepreneurism and ultimately true success really is.
Mm-hmm. What is one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you're younger? Like, what would you want to tell your younger self?
That I think, like, work can be really fun if you find, like, your passion.
Most people think work is not fun.
Yeah, and I think you can do it. And I think there's so many different jobs. I mean, I have 4 kids now, and I'm really trying to push on them to, like, figure out, like, what do you want to get up and do every day? Like, what do you like? Do you like to write? Do you like to, and also just that there's so many different opportunities too, that just because, like, you love to write, for example, it doesn't mean you need to go work for a magazine. Mm-hmm. Like, there's lots of different ways that you can sort of, like, lots of different things that you can do as a writer, lots of different things that you can do as, like, a photographer. So
right.
Yeah.
We all know no one succeeds alone and achieves dreams alone. So who helped you to get to where you're now?
I think there's so many people. I mean, I look at, I think there's, there's so many people that I probably even forget along the way, because I feel like I just was really, I think the most important thing is being sure that, open yourself up to talking to people along the way. I mean, that guy that I met, at the Mexican food restaurant,
right,
that, like, exposed me to this whole concept that there's, like, product placement people, right? Like, that's something that is, really exciting. I think, my parents definitely, I mean, I talked a little bit about my dad and sort of having that entrepreneurial spirit, but my mom, like, when I was in kindergarten, my mom was an art history major, always knew a lot about art. She taught art class in school for many, many years, and then finally decided what she wanted to do with her life when, I was, like, in kindergarten and spending more time in school, was go and be in fashion. And we were like, really?
Wow.
Like, and she was like, yeah, I've always wanted to do it. So she didn't have this fear that was, like, something, that she couldn't do. And so we were like, well, how are you going to do it? And she was like, oh, I think it'd be so great if I could, like, be a buyer at a store. And so, she started at the bottom and she went into management training. And then she almost became, like, she worked actually until she was 80 in a department store in Scottsdale. And she became
amazing.
This lady, like, who, just, like, she was always, so nicely dressed and always, like, into, never went out the door without makeup on or hair done and stuff. And she was, like, always just really into fashion. I mean, even if, like, she ended up being, like, the last probably 10 years in the children's department. And she just knew, she had 4 kids or 5 kids. And so she knew so much about fashion, like, about children and stuff. And so she knew all the designers. And so she almost became, like, the original personal shopper.
Wow.
Like, before personal shopping even became, like, an actual job. Like, my mom, would call people. A lot of them were, like, my friends or, like, friends that she knew from, us kids, like, their parents and stuff. And she was like, oh, there's, like, I know you really like Ralph Lauren, and, like, there's this collection that came in and we only got a couple of pieces and it's going to sell out. And so they'd be like, oh gosh, set it to the side for me. And she's like, okay, don't worry, I will, don't worry. And I don't know, it's like she loved what she did.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I saw that passion too. And I also saw this, like, she had no, I don't know, maybe she feared it a little bit, but you never saw it in her that changing, like, from an art history to fashion at age 45 was, like, strange, right?
Wow.
Like, she just went and did it. And
so you think that must have influenced you, right?
Oh, I think I think it was huge. I think another big influencer that I had in my life. My brother, who's 14 years older than me, he is a lawyer. And when he was in law school, he'd come home for the summer and he'd paint houses during the summer. And so he would tell me to go around the block and figure out if there were different houses in our neighborhood that needed painting. And so that he could then go to them and give his flyer to say I paint houses. He was never aspirational to go and be a house painter.
Right.
But basically what he taught me was that sometimes you have to do things in order to get to the next level, or to set your life up to be how you want it to be. And he was putting himself through college. And so, he didn't want to work when he was in college, so he had to make a lot of money during the summer. And he also, fixed Volkswagen Bugs. He had them repainted and reupholstered and everything, and then he always sold them for 2 to 3 times what he ended up buying them for. And so
he's an entrepreneur.
He's an entrepreneur. Yeah, I mean he's a medical malpractice attorney in Scottsdale, but I would watch him. Mm-hmm. And I would just be bored, and I'd sit in the garage with him while he was doing it. And he was like, "Kara, can you believe it? I sold that car for 3 times the amount." And, and I was like, way to go. I was so excited about it because I just thought, it was a game, right? Yeah. But it was also, I saw the excitement in him. And so there were a lot of people. And then again, my bosses too. I just learned a lot. I learned a lot about loving what you do and being passionate and and also working hard and showing up and and that is when employers employed me, I always had this idea I'm so lucky that that I have this job, but I'm also they're committed to me. Right? That I'm they're giving me this opportunity. There's a lot of trust there as well. So I really felt that was something I learned along the way as well.
Yeah. I think it's amazing what you've achieved as a mother of 4 children. How do you do it all? You built a very successful company and you raised 4 children, I think, who are all teenagers now. And how's it working with your husband? How do you do it all?
So, I think it really just goes back to loving what I do. It's funny because I get asked that a lot. And I think the key thing that I see about, being a mother and having, kids that are watching their mother work, it's they learn a lot along the way. My kids know about common stock versus preferred stock at such a young age, right? They know about placement on shelves and lighting and how that impacts it, and messaging and customer acquisition versus loyalty programs. They hear things along the way. And they teach me a lot about social media and all of that sort of stuff as well. But and other things I was never exposed to as a kid, supply chain. When you were 13 years old, did you understand what a head of supply chain did? He can actually, my son Justin, who I was pregnant with when I started Hint, he can actually articulate what supply chain is.
There's no better role model than seeing their mother pursuing her dreams, right?
Totally. Totally. So anyway, I think if you're doing something where your kids can actually see that you're, making a difference and making an impact. I remember a mother actually said to me that she had asked one of my kids, where's your mom traveling to and what's she doing or whatever. And what is she doing? And one of my kids said, oh, she's taking on the soda companies. And and so, you have a parent that's actually doing something that seems quite impossible, and your kids can see that in you, then it's it's aspirational, it's inspirational, lots of different things, right? Yeah. And then also seeing their parents working together. It's it used to be much more common that parents were working together, right, in small businesses. And I think then gone are the days that that's happening. And so I think they see their parents working together, and and frankly also raising a family. And it's like, I think it makes our unit even tighter. Like it's something that, we can sort of like, for example, I'm here in New York. My husband is not in New York right now because he's helping deal with some issues at applications and interviews for high school. And
so you're able to balance that. Yeah.
Totally.
Last question. Yeah. What would be your words of advice to people who want to pursue their dreams, especially women? Because I think we still have a long way to go until we can live in a world where women are given equal opportunities. And it's very hard for women now, especially moms, to be entrepreneurs. And I think it's amazing what you've achieved being a mother of four.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think that the key thing is like have a great support system in place. Like, I think it's such a key thing to be able to like, have like a family that is, especially if you're just starting out. I mean, if you don't like the fact that I've got, a husband that's very supportive of what I'm doing. And like, I think I'm really, really lucky because I have talked to people along the way who, unfortunately marry people that aren't that supportive about, their spouses and, so marry right if you're going to get married, and also, overall, I think that recognize that there are options for people to, really do something that is super fun. And also, we're a for-profit company, but it's like, it's really, really valuable when you have people talk about work-life balance. Like, I think it's not just that it's relating to people who have, a family. I think it's also related to, like, if you're not very happy with your job, like, I think it's hard to be happy in life. And vice versa. If you're not very happy in life, it's hard to, like, not be happy at work too. So I think really recognizing that, like, how do you find that happiness? And, it might not be what your best friend or your neighbor does, but it's like for you. Yeah. And for me, I think it's I found it, and then I just wanted to like get up every day and do it. Mm-hmm. So.
And you talk a lot about how important it is to know yourself, right?
Yeah.
Not a lot of people do.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. So, well, thank you so much,
Kara.
This is awesome.
You also have a podcast, Unstoppable with Kara Goldin.
Yeah, so you can learn more about Hint at drinkhint.com, and then also download our podcast at Unstoppable with Kara Goldin. And also I'm on social media channels, a lot on Twitter at Kara Goldin. It's KaraGoldin.
Thank you so much, Kara. Thanks for sharing your story. It was so much fun.
It was great.
If you want to see the show notes for today's episode, just open up your podcast app and click on today's show notes, or you can go to selinalee.co/episode 16. That is CELINALEE.co/episode 16. I've also put together a free guide to the 3 steps to finding true career fulfillment, and you can also download it on my website. And as I let you know at the beginning of the episode, I'm working on a new episode where I'll be answering your questions. So if you have any questions or challenges in your career or about pursuing your dreams, please send me a message on my website. And please subscribe on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And while you're at it, I would really appreciate it if you can please write me a review. It really helps me to spread the word and get discovered by new listeners. For questions about my coaching or to reach out to me with any thoughts or questions about my podcast, you can also visit my website at selinalee.co, and I look forward to hearing from you. So thank you so much, and I'll be back soon with another episode. I hope you have a great week.